Fear is the number one inhibitor of mathematics. It's the one reason why people suck at math. You see that in primary school, and you see that in research departments. It's exactly the same. It's the same fear. Competition has raised, but the stakes are exactly the same. When you're a professional mathematician, you know that this is the way it happens, so you don't take it too personally. You accept that you're going to struggle for a while, and you know that you have to fight against that instinct that you should go away from that.
Welcome to the Information Theory Podcast. Today, I'm speaking with David Bessis. He's a mathematician and the author of the book Mathematica. In this episode, we talk about why even mathematicians can't read math textbooks. We discuss whether genetics can actually explain mathematical ability, and we explore the important role that fear plays in learning mathematics. I want to thank my friend Chris for turning me on to David's book. And with that, here's the interview. David, thank you so much for joining me today from Paris. When I first reached out to you, I admitted that I was initially skeptical about the book's egalitarian message. It felt like pandering or feel-good thinking. But as I kept on reading, I found so many of the ideas fascinating and even compelling. You have all these intuition pumps throughout the book, the vacuum cleaner instruction manual, 1 billion minus 1. And they didn't just function as illustrative metaphors. They actually got to the heart of the matter in ways that made me rethink my assumptions about mathematics and mathematical ability. So there's so many productive and provocative ideas in the book. So let me just start with the idea that math books are not meant to be read, which was quite shocking to me when I saw it written down on the page. So tell me what you mean by this and how you came to realize it.
Yeah, so first of all, thanks for having me. I'm super happy to be here, and especially to discuss what disturbed you initially, because I think that's a very important part of the question. But let's start by the entry point that you're suggesting, the one from the math book that you're not supposed to read. Well, you don't read the telephone book. You don't read the user manual of your toaster. You don't do that. You have them as reference when you need them. But a book that we can read, like a novel, is functioning in a completely different way from a math book. In a regular book, the words that are used in the book have a meaning for you. They're casual words from casual language. Whereas in a math book, language functions a bit differently. Some people say that math is a special language. I don't agree with that. I would say that math is a different relationship with language. You interact with language in a different way. So the way it works in mathematics is words are defined in a very precise way. You have instructions for building up concept, and you use this concept to build more complex concepts, and then you articulate them, and you do that for hundreds of pages. Now, of course, you could start from page 1 and read it like you read a story, but the thing is, if you do that, your brain will be completely overwhelmed. You will be bored to death. It's a bit like reading the user manual of your toaster if that user manual was actually the assembly guide for the people on the assembly line, saying, okay, you put a transistor here and a resistor here. It's completely boring. What you want to know is, where do I put the bread and how do I troubleshoot when I have an issue? So the right way to interact with a math book is exactly that. When you open a math book, you have a reason for doing that. There's something you want to understand, something you want to learn, or proof that you kind of know, but you're not sure about the detail. You have to go directly to that point. And then maybe, exactly like you would do if you troubleshoot your toaster, maybe if you open the book on page 123 and it references another page before, maybe you have to go there, but maybe not. And if you do that, then you have a real motivation for trying to understand something. It will be hard, because it's always hard to open a book in the middle, but it's much easier than spending 3 months reading the first 100 pages.
Yeah, so you're saying, just like a toaster instruction manual, like nobody actually does it. Nobody actually reads the book from beginning to end, and it would be extremely hard and unproductive to do so. Well, one of the surprising things about it is that it took you as a mathematician a very long time to realize this, and you didn't realize this completely on your own. And I guess the other surprising thing about it is that when we take mathematics courses, we do read textbooks in some sense, right? Although we're led through them by the instructor. So how do you think about that?
Yeah, so I learned about that in graduate school when I was a PhD student. And I learned it by just confronting to the impossibility of reading a book. I had heard about an interesting book that was not absolutely key, but that was still very interesting, and everybody was saying it's very well written. So I tried to read it, and then I could not read it. I just was stuck on the first page. So I think the general pattern is a lot of what's important in math is implicit knowledge that is not really about mathematics, but about metacognition. And there's a tradition that goes back to the ancient Greeks, that what you write, and it's the same thing about math books actually, what you write in math books is one part of the story. And the rest of the story is something that most people have to find out by themselves. And that goes a long way to explaining. We start to see, this question about where does the inequality come from. There is a massive gap in talents. And I do think that the ability to get those metacognition hints is essential for progressing. And they are rarely articulated in an explicit manner. I think this really the central point behind the whole story is there are two different sides of mathematical knowledge. One is the mathematical corpus, the definitions, the lemmas, the theorems, the proofs, and the rest of it is some informal knowledge that is usually not considered noble enough to be written down.
Yeah, you actually refer to this in your book as secret math, right? You draw a distinction between the official math that's kind of written down, desiccated in these textbooks that people really struggle with. And then you say, there's the secret math that's passed down in an oral tradition. And it's not actually something that we're very good at transmitting or is taught in, say, high schools, right?
We're not very good because we're not even trying, actually. I think we could be much better at that.
Mm-hmm. I mean, so if this is an oral tradition that's been passed down between mathematicians, what does this actually look like? Because when you say we're not even trying, I think one of the claims you make in the book, which is like pretty extraordinary, is that most of the math you learn is the secret math. It's not the official math, and that it's kind of picked up haphazardly, almost by accident, right?
So obviously, calling that secret math is a massive simplification. You have to find gimmicks that people remember that. I would say it breaks down into two main categories. There is the secret math that is actually the mathematical intuition, the way you should look at things, the way you should understand things. And this is really what, when you're a pro mathematician, you spend your time, chatting with a piece of chalk in your hand with another mathematician at a blackboard and trying to communicate intuitions. So this is the heart of the day-to-day conversations in the math department. This is what you talk about. So it's the informal way of making sense of what's written in the papers. And there is another component of secret math that is really the metacognition thing, which is even more secretive. This is the one you don't speak with everyone because it's so bizarre that when you start having this conversation, it's usually outside of the department. It's usually when you're hiking or you're having dinner with someone, you're drinking, and then they start to tell you crazy stories. Like I had the chance of going, not hiking, but rock climbing with Jean-Pierre Serre. So probably greatest living mathematician, or one of the contenders for that title. And he was casually explaining a lot of things. Like he was saying, proving a theorem is a bit like rock climbing. The right way of rock climbing is doing things in a way such that every move you make is reversible, so that you put no stress anywhere. And a good proof should be reversible in the same way. So it's kind of, it looks like you're speaking with Yoda and you have this kind of fuzzy new age type of discourse, but you're not speaking with Yoda. You're speaking with an outstanding mathematician who is trying to communicate something that is important to him. Another thing he told me on another occasion is it's actually great to cook when you're a mathematician because, slicing vegetables is the exact opposite and the complement of your day-to-day life as a mathematician. It's a very good exercise for having your brain, relax and kind of focus out in a way that is going to be productive for you. You cannot write that in a book. It's ridiculous in a way. But there are many kind of stupid details like that are shared, and mathematicians tend to attach a lot of importance to that. They kind of approach their field as if it were some kind of martial art and the kind of secrets of the trade. It's really. I don't want to overemphasize a few anecdotes I have because I suspect this is a general pattern, but of course I cannot prove it. That's the annoying thing.
I read somewhere that you wanted to call the book Secret Math, but the publisher pushed back because I guess they were afraid it would be kind of too new agey kind of vibe to it. But you say that there's two parts of it, right? There's the mathematical intuition that you share on the blackboard, and I guess let's say you're an undergrad or a high school student, that's the part that the teacher might impart to you to get you through a textbook, right? And that's the way that they would transmit, say, Calculus 1 to you, even though you are working from a textbook. You're not solely relying on it. You're actually getting the intuition from the teacher. But this metacognition thing is much more of a secret. It's kind of it's a trade secret. It's closely held, and maybe not even because of kind of like professional reasons. It's just because people are too embarrassed at how simple or kind of wacky it all sounds, right?
I think the wacky is more important than the simple. I think, mathematicians are not that elitist. When you speak with them, you realize that many of them would like their trade to be better known, but it's really wacky and it's embarrassing, and you cannot really teach that. Going back to intuition, there is, for example, a very important thing. And it's something that I'm struggling to explain because every time I emphasize intuition and the need for people to build their own intuition, there's a massive misconception associated with that, is the idea that we could substitute the formal teaching, the way it's done, with an intuitive one. And this doesn't work because you cannot transfer intuitions by, sharing them with your voice. It doesn't work like that. So intuition can be shared in one-on-one conversation because you have this very slow back and forth, and that is very adaptive to, okay, oh yes, you understand that, but not that. So I'm going to explain it this way to you, and then you're going to react, and I'm going to see something in your eye that tells me that you're absolutely lost. So I'm going to try differently. And then suddenly I will see a spark in your eye, and then, okay, we go more of that side, and then we're going to get where we want. It is impossible to replicate in a classroom. So there is this ambiguity of the mathematical discourse, and that's the most difficult thing when you're teaching. You have to try to communicate intuition, but on the other hand, you have to stick to the formal definitions of things, because that's the only way that people who come with a different angle will be able to connect to what you're saying. So here, that's an example where the important metacognition thing is actually more important than the intuition transfer. The metacognition thing is you should have a very strong curiosity for your own intuition, and you should try to improve it, and you should listen to it, and you should listen to crazy ideas that you have in your brain that are stupid, that are wrong, but you should voice them, because if you don't do that, your intuition will never get better. And if I look at the number one metacognitive trick that is actually explained publicly when mathematicians try to explain their trade, it's this one. It's essential to say stupid things. It's essential to ask stupid questions. It's essential to be super honest about what you understand and what you don't understand. And it will take a lot of time, and you have to ask stupid questions, not just once, but over and over and over again, until it becomes transparent to you. And this explains why, actually, it's nobody's fault that teaching is not really functioning in the classroom. It cannot really function that way.
So what you're saying is this kind of, you can't transmit intuition in a classroom because the conversation needs to be adaptive and like tailored to the specific student. So then during your PhD education, is this how you actually acquired a lot of knowledge, is through this like one-on-one interaction with your advisor or your peers? Is that how it is for most mathematicians?
That was the case for me. I could not speak with my advisor because I was very shy and very inhibited, and I was having some kind of brain fog whenever I was speaking with him. So we spoke about many things. It was very warm and very friendly, but we were never discussing mathematics. I was discussing with his prior student, who was a permanent researcher in his team, who is actually a brilliant mathematician named Raphaël Rouquier, who is right now a professor at UCLA. And Raphaël shared so many insights. That's incredible. I mean, he taught me mathematics. Like, it's really like I was his Padawan in a way. I mean, we were really like speaking every day, having casual conversation on many topics. He was explaining me abstract notions in a very casual way. And this is how I got massively better. There's some people who go another route that actually contradicts the first thing we were discussing, the fact that you should never read the math book. There is one exception to that. If you pick an excellent one that is from an excellent author and that introduces a very important idea. So like some people have started their career by just trying to understand a bunch of papers by Grothendieck. And this is good. I mean, this is something you can also do. And then it's a different pace. You just sit by yourself, trying to understand one paper, one line at a time. And it will take you months and months, but you will basically become so fluent in the material that you will, it's as if you had written it yourself in a way. But it will require massive effort. So there is more than one avenue to getting better at math. But it depends on the degree of courage and autonomy that you have.
Would you say that the second method is inefficient, or it's just more suited to our particular cognitive style?
I think you should use both depending on the moment of your trajectory. When you do research, it really resembles the second one. You're just by yourself, except that you're not reading a paper, you're trying to write one. But it's almost the same, because you're just trying to make sense of something that's too difficult for you. And it's a situation where you cannot have a sparring partner because nobody understands what you're talking about or what you're trying to understand. So you cannot just get better at math by speaking with someone. So I think the first method is a very good one for increasing your general mathematical culture. You need that, because things get easier when you have more than one reference point, more than one angle to understand the situation. But especially when you're a graduate student or a researcher, you need to actually drill down very deep in the bedrock at one location that is yours. And you can only do that in the second style. You cannot do that by conversations.
You mentioned something interesting, which is the idea of courage. And you actually write a lot about the idea of fear in Mathematica. So speaking from your own experience, what is the role of fear in mathematics?
Fear is the number one inhibitor of mathematics. It's the one reason why people suck at math, is because they're afraid of math. So you see that in primary school, and you see that in research departments. It's exactly the same. It's the same fear, except that it's at a different level. The competition has raised, but the stakes are exactly the same. You're facing something that is too hard for you on a cognitive level. And it's absolutely scary. It's the worst thing that can happen to you from a cognitive standpoint. You feel stupid. And you try, and you try, and you still don't get it. So I would say the difference with primary school is that when you're a pro mathematician, you know that this is the way it happens, so you don't take it too personally. You accept that you're going to struggle for a while, and you know that you have to fight against that instinct that you should go away from that because it's too hard for you. So it's something that you gradually domesticate. For example, if I look at how I domesticated my own fear, so I think my fear was more extreme than typical one, because when I was 21, I started a PhD on a topic that I was not really interested in. It was a very difficult moment for me, and I actually failed it. So I had to start again 2 years after that. So when I started again, I had this kind of feeling that I was inferior to the regular PhD student.
So you actually, you literally failed out of the program and you had to re-enroll, or?
Yeah, so that was in France, and I was a student at the École Normale Supérieure, which is a kind of a very selective, very prestigious school. So the fact that I was a student at that school granted me a second chance. And I think that if I had not been a student there, I would never have the chance to uh, start again in a very good program with an excellent advisor that was not the same one as the one I started the first PhD with. So in the end, I landed back on my feet, but I was extremely lucky and extremely privileged. I should be very transparent. It's normally you don't recover from that. I mean, most people don't recover. Some do recover, but the likelihood is not that high. My own feeling of inferiority was really overwhelming when I started again. And I remember the first years, I could not focus for more than a couple of hours every week. Most of the time I was just inhibited by my fear. And the first thing I was able to do is to just be by myself for maybe 1 or 2 hours a day and try to be stronger than my fear for 1 or 2 hours a day. The other thing I could do is speak with Raphael at that moment where I was I felt extremely weak. And then it became a bit better. And I would say the hardest thing to achieve, that I achieved not as a PhD student, but a few years after that, when I became a permanent researcher with some kind of higher status in the symbolic hierarchy of mathematicians, then finally I dared to ask stupid questions during seminar talks. And for me, that was kind of a holy grail of self-confidence. Like, I remember a talk I was attending one day at a seminar. It was a 90-minute talk. So a 90-minute talk on a topic that you don't understand and you're overwhelmed from the first minute is very long and very painful. And there was this guy that was giving that seminar talk. And he was giving seminar talks every year on, he had this very special niche, very difficult topic, very deep, but very special topic. And one day I was sitting at the seminar and he started his talk, like maybe 20 people in the room. And he started his talk by saying, okay, I recall the definitions from my talk of 2 years ago where I had capital P, small p, G, K, exactly like in my talk 2 years ago. And like for the first time in my life, I just blurted, no, you don't have a right to do that. We don't understand a word in what you're saying. Please repeat and start again, very quietly, explain everything. Otherwise, we will not get it. And he was stunned. And then he did the 90 minutes speaking to me, because then I was like, I had the permission to ask more questions. He ended up maybe saying like 20% of what he had planned to say, because he was interrupted all the time by questions. And he was happy because someone listened to his talk. Because what I discovered after that, because some other researchers from the team came to me after the talk and said, thank you, that's the first time we understand something from his talk. Like, this whole team of professional mathematicians had been sitting for years, listening to this guy, not daring to interrupt him while he was saying something that nobody could understand. That says something about the degree of penetration of fear within the pro-math community. No one dared to do that.
Yeah, that's incredible. I mean, that's as shocking as the idea that math books are not meant to be read, right? The idea that conference talks are not meant to be understood. You're saying that in general, mathematicians go to these conferences, they give these canned talks, and there's very little comprehension going on, right? And you're saying that the reason for this is a culture of fear of being seen as less intelligent.
I don't think it's a culture of fear. I think it's a natural response. Fear is a natural response. Everybody is trying to circumvent fear, but it's very hard. I don't think that people are comfortable with fear. I don't think that they're happy with the situation, but they just find it very hard to confront fear. I saw a transformation during my years as a researcher, from starting from a young PhD student to the moment I quit math. I quit math when I was 35. So net, maybe I spent like 12 years from the beginning of my PhD to quitting math. And during those 12 years, I saw an evolution of the community towards, more accessible talks, because everybody knows this is an issue. And math books are not meant to be read, because they're meant to serve a different purpose, which is to solidify knowledge in a way that is accessible, but not in a linear way, but in kind of random access memory. Okay, but conference talks, they're not references. So they're here to serve a purpose that is to communicate knowledge to the people in the room. So everybody knows this is dysfunctional, but they're trying to fix it. And they're making some progress. They're making some progress because, I mean, it's a dynamic situation. People are not stupid. What I'm describing about the dysfunctions of the mathematical research community, I'm not the only one aware of that, and people obviously try to fix that. And it's like with YouTube, we start to see people sharing abstract concepts in a way that are very innovative, and people learn a lot about how to communicate ideas. And it's much easier to access knowledge today than it was maybe 15 years ago.
So in the book, you describe your early childhood, the visualization exercises, and then you talk about how geometry class at age 15 was absurdly easy for you. So for me, one of the tensions of the book is its deeply egalitarian message about mathematical ability versus your own trajectory through France's hyper-competitive and meritocratic educational system. So I'm wondering, could you describe how as a child and teenager you actually made sense of your exceptional performance? Did teachers or parents tell you that you had special mathematical talent? And, what did you believe about why you were succeeding when others were not?
So I should correct you on one thing. I don't think my message is egalitarian, actually. It's anti-hereditarian, but it's not egalitarian. And I think inequality is there, structural. I actually think it's biological, but it's not genetic. And there's a mental shortcut that we used to take, that is to equate biology with genetics. But I do think that mathematical talent very often develops in early childhood. I mean, it would be, you have to be really dishonest to look at the history of mathematics and not observe that there is a striking pattern of very young people doing absolutely crazy things, like Gauss, not even considering the probably apocryphal anecdote about, the sum of integers from 1 to 100, but still, I think he was 19 when he solved the constructivity of regular polygons. He solved the problem that was 2,000 years old, and he was a teenager. That is incredible. So how do you account for that? It's clearly not nurtured, not at least in the way we understand nurture. So a theory I have is that, and again, I'm not a neuroscientist, so let's take that as a metaphor, but this metaphor is important because we can use it to recalibrate our expectations for what does the nature versus nurture debate should look like, rather than the stupid simplification we're thinking about right now. So this theory is that cognitive development is a very complex process. The human brain is a very complex, nonlinear thing, and there's many, many different operating modes. We experience that every day. Like there are moments where you are really focused, and there are moments where you're completely defocused. There are moments where you try to visualize things and you meditate, and moments where you are actually computing in a completely different mindset. And these different modes are actually hard to communicate to another person. And we have no idea what people do in their mind. Like when I was a kid, I was playing with my intuition in ways that are very atypical. Right now I'm wearing contacts, but I'm very short-sighted, and I had very thick glasses, and I started to have glasses when I was, I think, 3 or 4. And in my stupid, paranoid kid mindset, I was thinking, okay, maybe I'm going to get blind very soon, so I should better train for the moment I will become blind. And I was training for that. And I was training in my apartment when I was coming back from school, in primary school. And I was trying to memorize the position of the furniture and to navigate in the room with my eyes closed. And when I started, I was not really good, but then I got better and better and better. And then I practiced more and more. I practiced really stupid games, like walking in the street, seeing a building with a window and thinking, okay, what if I was behind that window and looking at the street? What would I see? trying to imagine things from a different perspective. Everybody is free to play that game, but most people don't do it. What happens to your brain when you play that game like for 10 years, not every day, but quite often, and you become better, you see your trajectory, and you remember that you started being very weak, then you become better and better and better. What happens is when you're 15 and you're sitting in a classroom at high school and they teach you 3D geometry and everything looks completely stupid to you because it's so easy. And you look like a math genius. And it looks like it's genetic. But, in my case, I don't think it's genetic.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, when I read that, I thought of there's a physicist named Brian Greene, and in one of his books, he writes about how, as he was a child, he and his father played a very similar game. I don't remember the details, but it was something like they would try to visualize things that they could see, but from a different perspective. And I wonder, this can't just be a coincidence. I wonder how common this is among physicists and mathematicians. Like, have you talked to other people and they told you they were playing games like this in their mind when they were children?
So it's a super interesting question because it opens many different lines that are all equally important. One is that I am a geometer. Not all mathematicians are geometers. My advisor is a true algebraist. And one reason why I actually could never have conversation with him is I could not understand a word in his arguments. What I learned after that is he could not understand a word of my way of thinking because I think in a very geometric way. He thinks in a very, symbolic, linguistic. I just don't understand that. Even though I'm an algebraist, I understand algebra from a geometric perspective. So I think there are different flavors of STEM talents, and one is the geometric avenue, and this one, I do suspect that there is some childhood games that are associated with that. My prime example of that's an incredible story. That's the story of Bill Thurston, the fantastic mathematician who received the Fields Medal and was the author of the famous geometrization conjecture, which is what actually Perelman proved when he proved the Poincaré conjecture. The geometrization conjecture implies the Poincaré conjecture. And you could argue that Thurston was the most impressive true geometer of the past 50, 60, whatever years. And he had that incredible talent that looks like a mutant shrink from outer space. He could see in 4D and in 5D. That's unbelievable. I know a few mathematicians who can see in 4D, but 5D is, I just don't understand how you can do that.
So do you mean he can actually rotate five-dimensional objects in his mind's eye?
I don't know exactly what he could do. It's not clear. But the geometry he did in 3D is clearly from someone who can look at 3D from the outside. There's no doubt that he looks at 3D the way, when you want to understand two-dimensional topology, the shapes of manifolds in 2 dimensions, you see them as, a sphere, a donut, a torus with 2 holes, a Klein bottle if it's not oriented, like these kind of things. But you see them from outside embedded in 3 dimensions. Now, if you want to do the same thing for dimension 3, it's very good if you can view dimension 3 as kind of manifold within a 4-dimensional space or 5-dimensional space. He had insights. There's that incredible video on YouTube that you can find about the sphere eversion theorem that he proved. And they made an animated 3D video and he collaborated to that. It's an incredibly psychedelic experience. It's maybe like 10, 15 minutes. I recommend everyone to watch this video. This guy had ideas that, even when they're in 3D, looks like they're coming from the brain of an alien. That's obvious. I mean, you don't come up with ideas like that unless you train yourself to visualize things in a very systematic way. And now the twist in the story is he was not born that way. And we know what happened to him. And the story is documented, it's fact. He was born with a very strong squint, and he could not see 3D the way normal people see 3D because his eyes were looking at different regions of space and there was no overlap. So he had no perception of 3D. That was a massive handicap. And So here we have combination of multiple things. First, you go through a certain route that is not the expected one. So I would call that idiosyncratic cognitive development. There's an incident, a starting incident that throws you in a completely different developmental pathway. In that pathway, you have some very important nurture dimension. His mother was a very loving and very courageous woman who decided she would do anything to try to help his son overcome his handicap. And she was very creative in the way she did that, and very systematic, and very generous with her time. And when he was 2, he spent hours and hours and hours with special books that she had bought and maybe special shapes that she had built to train him systematically to try to rebuild his 3D vision. And that's, it's like a scientific experiment, you know, it's people don't do that. And you're not permitted to do that at scale, but at least we know in that example it was done. And we know from him, I mean, why would he bullshit us on that? You know, his story is very transparent. He said that when he entered primary school, he made the decision that he would practice visualization every single day to become better. And doing that, he applied the same technique he used to see in 3D. How did he manage to see in 3D? He managed by training his brain and using neuroplasticity in a way that allowed him to imagine 2 different 2-dimensional shapes and was able to reconstruct the 3D shape coming from that. So that's the way you assemble 3D. You assemble by slices or different projections of 2D. I don't know the exact technique he used, but it's something like that. Now, if you do it that way, well, there's no reason to stop. You could start, you take 2 3-dimensional pictures and assemble them in 3D, and take 2 4-dimensional pictures and assemble them in 5D. And well, he said he did that. How can we prove he's telling the truth? Well, maybe we could have made some study of his brain. It was not done, not as that I know, but at least we have some incredibly powerful theorems and conjectures that clearly have some edge in thinking about geometry, and it's very believable where he's coming from there. So another important thing about this example, and it goes back to what you were saying about your reaction to the perceived egalitarian message of my book. It's easy to dismiss this because it's n equal 1. You know, it's one example. But when you look at how the example is structured, how it looks like, you kind of understand why it's always n equal 1, because it's so messy, this thing. Like, in the case of Thurston, we have a documented incident. Who knows what happened to Gauss? Who knows what happened to Grothendieck? We don't really know, you know. It doesn't have to be something that is documented in the history books. Maybe it's just someday at some crazy force. It's basically what Descartes is saying in his book. He's saying in the discourse of method that's supposed to be the foundation of modern rationality. He's saying, I'm not smarter than a normal person. I wish I was smarter, but I'm like a normal person, but I just stumbled upon a method, and it made me René Descartes. Well, I mean, that looks like some self-help crap, you know. It's nonsensical in a way, but maybe it always kind of looked like that, you know.
Yeah, so your conjecture is that all these extreme outliers are not genetic outliers, but they all fell within, they all came upon some sort of idiosyncratic cognitive development that was self-reinforcing. Maybe the most provocative claim in your book is that you make an argument that math ability cannot be explained by genetics. First of all, what is the argument, right? Just boil down to the most basic form.
Yeah. So just be clear, I'm not a blank slateist, and I don't think that people are genetically equal. I think there are obvious differences between people, and actually there are some instances where your genetic makeup make you incapable of doing math. Like if you have Down syndrome, it's maybe not impossible. I had some readers who wrote to share stories about people with Down syndrome actually being good at math, but it's kind of rare, you know? And it's very likely that these people who are geniuses, they have a better than average genetic makeup. I'm entirely willing to believe that. I'm entirely willing to believe that Terry Tao is in the top 1% genetically. But the thing is...
So can you explain? So Terry Tao, can you just explain how much he exceeds, the rest of the pack? So Terry Tao is a famous mathematician who actually blurbed your book, right? So just give us an idea of what his output has been.
So there are so many different angles you can look at him. Is really 1 in 10 billion. We're 8 billion, but I think if we were like 2 additional billion, we would not get another territory in it. So let's say it's 1 in 10 billion. He received the gold medal at the International Math Olympiads, I think at 13. That's kind of crazy. He wrote I don't know how many papers on how many different topics. So I have a friend who's also blurbed my book. He became a friend after reading the book, so it was not a conflict of interest. We became my friend after doing that, but he blurbed the book. His name is Hugo Dumilly-Copin. He received the Fields Medal. I think it was in 2022, or last time it was awarded, or 2024. I always forget the years, but he's a recent Fields medalist. I was discussing that topic with him, and he said that in his own perception, which is completely subjective, but still, he thinks that Terry Tao is at least 10x faster than he is at absorbing new mathematics. So, when you look at the 100-meter dash, like when Usain Bolt set his record, he ran 1.5% faster than the second guy and 3% faster than the last guy in the race. And if you think about it, we make a big deal. I mean, obvious genetic differences between men and women. But you know what? The speed when running the 100-meter dash the speed difference is about 10%. I mean, if the difference at math ability was 10%, nobody would be talking about it. It's orders of magnitude different from that. If you look at height, which is known to be massively genetically determined thing, it looks like a perfect Gaussian, which is normal. It's what you expect because it's polygenic. There's not a single gene that affects your height. There are hundreds and thousands of locations that are involved, all of them contributing a tiny amount. And what you get in these situations is you get a bell curve because of the central limit theorem, basically. That says, that's what you get. You flip a huge number of coins, and the distribution is a bell curve. And we tend to think of the bell curve thinking about the differences, but actually, this is not the way you should think about bell curves. I have a very Nassim Talebian view of bell curves versus Pareto distributions and fat tails. A bell curve for me is everybody is basically the same. We all have the same height, plus minus 10 or 20, 30% in some exceptions, but we all have basically the same height, which means that we can all, except when we have specific disabilities, we can all go through the same doors and into the same cars and eat at the same tables and with the same fork and knife. I mean, there's not people who make that tall, maybe 1 inch, and maybe people who are 3 miles high. It just does not exist. But in math, this is what you get. The gap is so massive. And actually, that's the very reason why people get to think that this is genetic. They see a crazy inequality, and they want a crazy explanation for that. And since there's no crazy differences in the social backgrounds of people, they assume there's a crazy difference in their genes because that's the only place where they look for one. What I'm saying is, when you have crazy differences between people, you see that with wealth, for example. Wealth is massively unevenly distributed. We all know that. But why? Why does it look like a Pareto distribution? Well, because there is a feedback loop. The richer you are, the more money you earn, the more opportunity you get to invest in the better VC firms. And if you're dumb money, then you get to lower grade. We all know the story. Well, if you have species redefining inequalities between people, they're not likely to be genetic. I don't know any instance of within species variability in a given sex. Of course, you have sexual dimorphism, but I don't know of any species redefining inequality within animals of the same sex that are caused by genetics. There are examples of massive inequalities in nature, like the queen bee lives 100 times longer than the worker bee. She is 3 times bigger. And she lays millions of eggs, while the other ones are sterile. But this is epigenetics, it's not genetics. It's not genomic inequality. It's epigenetics based on the developmental circumstances. And I think human cognition is a good candidate for something where you have massive divergence of outcomes, because it's a massively complex machinery that builds over decades. And your emotion, the way you invest your time, what you do in your mind, like, are you depressed all day, or are you thinking about creating new stuff? You know, it's different.
So you say the mechanism by which this massive inequality is generated is this randomly occurring self-reinforcing mechanism. But isn't it possible that the people who go down these paths, they're led there by genetically determined temperament, disposition?
Yeah, very likely. Again, I have no objection to the fact that there is some genetic contribution. There is. It should be, like in everything. What I'm saying is you get more variance coming from the pathway you're taking than from the genetic makeup. And the mathematics of that explanation is that you don't have enough genetic variability within the gene pool of the human species to generate such drastic outcomes in a deterministic way.
Before you said deterministic, the claim of that sentence before the word deterministic was inserted was that there's not enough genetic variance to explain the phenotypic variance. But this itself could just be like an artifact of the way you're measuring things, right? Because if you have a standard correlation, it's designed to measure linear relationships. It's very sensitive to outliers. And even if you have a perfectly causal relationship between something that's normally distributed and Pareto distribution that's deterministic from that, you're not going to get a very high correlation. So are you merely making the argument that there's this artifact of the way we measure linear correlations, or are you saying something more than that, which is even if we rank ordered everybody and flattened out the wide Pareto distribution of outcomes, we would still not see a high correlation?
So what I'm saying is, let's change roles. Let's say we start from the idea that it's genetically determined. Okay, and I want to start from that idea too, because in a way I also have this idea that there is some genetic contribution, some genetic spark to that. And actually, I think it might be more related to the emotion control rather than what people imagine to be the cognitive horsepower. You know, I think it's more emotional than computational in a way. But if you want to start from this starting point of inborn inequality and get to the kind of outcomes we're talking about. Because also, of course, I'm not just, and maybe I should be transparent about that, I'm not just thinking about the abstract mathematical argument I've made about distribution, I'm also thinking about what is the material of mathematical inequality. And I know that if you access higher level abstractions, better concept, like someone who thinks with modern category theory is going to be better than someone who doesn't have that kind of way of thinking. Someone who is familiar with homotopy theory is going to be smarter than someone who's not familiar with homotopy theory. And there are dozens and dozens of dimensions, including some that I mentioned one where I'm stronger than average, but some where I'm weaker than average, some kind of high-level conceptual machinery that if you master that, you get better. And it's obvious, everybody knows that. I mean, you don't get to be Grothendieck if you're born in ancient Greece. You need all the buildup of mathematics before you to become Grothendieck. So at least there is a capitalization process that goes from your initial genetic advantage to the vantage point of having absorbed enough abstraction where you can actually be powerful at the level of modern math research. And this applied throughout history. It's not just an artifact of modernity. It's always been like that. Now, that journey is noisy, and that's the very important one. The word noisy, and it echoes the non-deterministic, the word that you mentioned about it being deterministic or not. So if you measure the irritability of that, you will find some signal. I'm not claiming there's no irritability. I don't know how much, and I don't want to try to invent a number. I have no idea what the actual number is. What I'm just saying is, when we see Terry Tao, there's something incredible in front of us. This guy is brilliant, agile, smart, fast, whatever, to a degree that is barely comprehensible even to a top mathematician. I have an anecdote about Terry Tao, actually. I have a friend who is an excellent mathematician. I don't want to disclose his name, but he's really an excellent mathematician. The kind of people who could possibly have been shortlisted at some point for whatever prize or something. And he was thinking about something. He had an interesting idea. And he was not sure if it was a good investment of his time to spend time thinking about this idea. He sent an email on a Friday to Terry Tao saying, hey, I have this idea. What do you think? Do you think it's good or bad? And on the Monday, Terry Tao wrote back with an attachment that was a 20-page PDF of a paper they'd written in the weekend, exploring and really building it. It doesn't make any sense, okay? So this incredible thing that we're noticing, we want to explain it. What do we mean by explaining it? Explaining it is not saying there's 20% variance coming from here and 12% variance coming from there. It's finding something that we call the explanation, okay? In a way, it's the same thing as when Darwin tried to explain the origin of species. I mean, we see diversity of animals. We want to understand that. To explain that? What does it mean to explain? It's not about writing equations that tell you exactly what happened, but what is the kind of latent structure that we're thinking, that we're looking at, and what makes sense and what doesn't make sense. Let's say genetics explain height in a context where everybody has enough food. Okay? I don't think that in the same way, genetic variability explains Terry Tao in the context where people have access to reading and writing and math books. It doesn't explain anything, I think.
So concretely, you're saying, given that Terry Tao is 1 in 10 billion in his output, you don't think he's 1 in 10 billion in his genetics. You know, he might be top 1%, top 0.1%.
I don't know if it's top 50%, top 10%, top 1%, top 1 per 1,000. But what I'm saying is it's very unlikely that he's outstanding in that dimension. Because if you look at the top 1 in a million, for whatever genetic makeup is more likely. Now, look at what it takes to get from that to being Terry Tao. You realize that there are so many reasons to fail along the way. You could have many issues. You could have a bad math teacher at some point that makes you depressed and you just want to never hear about math again. It's very common in real life. You could have parents who are absolute assholes and make you a very sad and frustrated person. He had outstanding parents. We know that. It's documented. He is very transparent about that. He was accelerated by a community. There's this famous picture of him speaking with Erdős when he was a kid. Not every kid, even gifted ones, have a chance to meet Paul Erdős. You know, it's not that common. So yeah, you have a number of instances. He's at the right moment, in the right place. And it doesn't remove anything to the admiration we should have for him. He deserves to be admired, there's no doubt. But there's so much noise, so much luck, so much... I suspect there are many, many people with the same genetic makeup who are, having horrible life outcomes.
I guess a more interesting question than this very academic question of what percent heritability is there is, What kind of interventions can we do? What kind of environment can we establish for somebody, right, to make sure that they live up to their potential? As a parent, so you mentioned earlier on before we started recording that you have a 2-year-old and a 6-year-old. My first question is, do you have kind of an idea or an aspiration for them to become mathematicians? And my second question is, given your unique perspective on this, have you done anything unusual in how you're raising them? Have you been encouraging the kinds of mental visualization games that you yourself grew up with, and I guess attribute a lot of your success to?
Yes. So again, I'm not egalitarian, and the message is not egalitarian. It's about setting the expectations. I wish we could make people more equal, but I think we're never going to succeed because of the structure of the mechanisms that create this inequality. Many of them are internalized, regardless of how welcoming and disinhibiting the environment might be. There is some inner dynamics that we cannot do much about. We should still strive for people to get as much as their potential as they can, and I do think that we're going to fail for almost everyone, because I think that actually many people have the potential to be Terry Tao, and there's just one Terry Tao. It's a fact of life, but so this is kind of a pessimistic half. The optimistic half is I still think that we have the opportunity to make people massively better than they are currently. And this is what we should focus on. I have no special plans for my kids to become mathematicians. I don't think it's a desirable outcome. What's desirable is to be happy in what you're doing and to have great opportunities and meet great people and do great things and get to earn a living with that. But whether it's math or something else, doesn't really matter. But I still think that I can make them 1,000 times better at math than they would do without the kind of very small interventions that are in my power. I think most of the divergences, again, I think there are like a dozen orders of magnitude in the outcome. And maybe I can control 2 or 3 of them. But it's better than nothing, and we should take that. And this is what actually my book is about. I still think that any reader of my book can become 1,000 times better at math. I myself become 1,000 times better at math between the moment I was a student at the École Normale Supérieure, which is already kind of elite, to the moment I quit mathematical research. And so with a 2-year-old, I'm just starting to teach him numbers, so it's really the beginning. So he was actually very happy the other day because he can count, the 2-year-old can count to 4, and he counted 1, 2, 3. He does, so it's in French, he says 1, 2, 3, and instead of saying 4, right now he says cac, 1, 2, 3, cac. And he showed me, hey, Daddy, you know what? It also worked with the other end. Look, 1, 2, 3, 4. He was so excited to discover that it also worked with the other end. It was wonderful. But that's as far as we've been so far. So for 2-year-old, I think that's okay. Continuing to 4 is already great. The other one, the 6-year-old, I had more chances. And what I did is I think 2 different kinds of conversation. It's always, I see that as games, conversation. It should not be like formal training. I think it should be, it's a game we play. You know, ask questions. Can you answer those questions? There are two types of the games. Some that are related to math. Very early on, I taught him about negative numbers. We have a lift, an elevator, and saying, okay, we're on the 5th floor. What happens if we go below? So it stops at the ground level, but what if we were going like down 7 floors? Okay, we go to the minus something, that's interesting. So he learned negative numbers by thinking about this elevator, and I think that's a very good thing. And right now he is entering primary school, and what I observe is making subtractions way better than anyone. Like they're making 5 minus 4, and he can make like 1,000 minus 230 or something, So that's much better. And I don't know if it will serve him, but what I'm happy with that is is enjoying the game, is proud of his ability, and I just think that this pride is a massive advantage for math and for everything else. The this already is massively divergent if you look in terms of outcome. Like this idea that you can play these games and that kids have the ability to practice mental computations earlier than is expected, without it being perceived as an effort, but being perceived as a game, and progressing way above the average of their peers in their class. I'm absolutely certain I'm not the only one. Maybe that 20% of parents doing that, but I'm pretty certain that not everybody is doing that. And whether or not you receive that is already a massive divergence. And in the example of Terry Tao, we know that he received some advantage like that. And for Thurston, he received that for geometry, except that it was not called geometry. It was called physical therapy for his vision, but it was the same. The other thing I'm insisting on is to helping train his imagination. So very early on, I'm the one waking up early in the morning, so my wife is usually not the one having the breakfast with the kid. I am the one having the breakfast. And the first thing I ask him is, did you have some dreams? What were the dreams? Can you tell me your dreams? Because I know that, I know from my own experience that the ability to recall dreams and put words, articulates what's really going on in the dream, describe situations, people, shapes, sensations, storylines. This ability is an excellent training for your intuition, because it forces you to not just sharpen your memory of things, but also sharpen your ability to put words to your memories. And there is a back and forth between language and imagination that is very productive. And also I encourage him to name his emotions. I think the ability to notice that you've been disturbed by something, that there's something off, that there's something that you felt, you were not comfortable with something, and you felt anguish or trouble somewhere, and you try to pinpoint where it's coming from, is a critical cognitive, metacognitive skill that is both absolutely necessary for mathematics, but also for your ability to socialize and have a successful career from a professional behavior standpoint. And of course, living with someone, building a family. I mean, these are critical skills that they're never explicitly explained. So one thing that struck me, and I'm being a bit long on that, but I think it's interesting because it connects many different aspects: mathematics, emotions, professional success. After I quit mathematics, I went into the software industry, and I started a tech company. And in this experience, I met with some very smart professionals from some working at very senior positions in Silicon Valley companies, VCs, people like that. I was surprised by the number of these people who were telling me things that resembled the metacognitive tricks that the top mathematicians used to tell me. Like, there's so many people like saying, hey, you know what, I'm going to ask you a stupid question, but the way I can remember things afterwards. That was the same exact trick that all mathematicians talk about. And you probably had the same experience. Like, the higher up you go in the cognitive pecking order of society, it's a bit ridiculous to describe it like that, but there's something of that kind. The more you see behaviors like that, like people who are willing to admit that they're wrong, willing to ask stupid questions, I don't think this is a coincidence. I mean,
So to go back to the original theme, which was that there are 12 orders of magnitude of outcomes, and you feel like you can affect 2 of them. You can increase 2 orders of magnitude for your kids. And you mentioned that you yourself had a 1,000 times increase between the very beginning of your career, I think you said, until the very end. There's a very, very interesting part of your book. There's a period of 6 weeks in your early 30s. You said they were the most productive in your life and that you accomplished more mathematically in those 6 weeks than in the previous 12 years. What happened in those 6 weeks?
Before I answer that question, which I absolutely love and I'm eager to answer it, I must step back and say, the 12 steps, these are random numbers, 12 orders of magnitude, and the 2 or 3 I can affect, and the 1000 progressive. These are completely, these are intuition pumps. I'm not making any objective, documented, rational statement here. Okay?
Of course.
So what happened is, in my area of research, some topics at the interface of geometric group theory and algebraic topology and representation theory and algebraic geometry, whatever, some conditional thing, and specific objects called complex reflection groups and their geometry. And there was a big conjecture in that micro domain. So it's a big for my domain, but it's small at the scale of mathematics. But it's a conjecture that was stated in the early 1970s, and the real case had been addressed by Pierre Deligne, who is absolutely fantastic mathematician. He wrote a paper in 1972 fixing the real case, and the complex case was still open. And I knew it was a big conjecture in my domain because I heard people talking about it, including some very smart people, and it was present in a very prominent place in certain reference books, so I knew it was kind of a big topic. In my first job, I was assistant professorship at Yale, and there I applied for an NSF grant. And I said, to try to look serious, okay, maybe my research someday could be used as a strategy to prove that theorem. But I never thought I would be the one proving it, of course. Maybe I thought maybe it will take 50 years, And after that, I had a permanent position in France, and then I spent years experimenting with myself on, trying to apply the techniques I thought I had identified as being the right ones, being my own subject of experiments on my metacognition trick. And I did that for years and years. And one morning I just woke up, and that was a moment where I had probably more confidence and also a better understanding of mathematics at stake. I woke up in the middle of the night and I was thinking about that conjecture, and I said, but what if my ideas about this conjecture are true? And maybe it's possible to go from what I've done to proving this conjecture. Well, if it's true, someone will do it. And if someone does it and it's not me, then it will be horrible. Like I will woke up one day on the archive, there will be a new preprint saying, okay, yeah, prove this conjecture. And I will be like, it will be the end of my career. I will be so depressed. So when this happened, I decided that it was a life or death issue for me, and I needed to work as hard as I can to prove it first.
So this is driven by fear in some ways.
Driven by fear, but when you get better, you manage to manipulate you to use your fear in a productive way. So it takes years to kind of twist that, You engineer your reaction to fear so that it's actually positive for you. And I worked for 7 weeks. So it's not the 6 weeks episode that I describe in the book. It's another 7 weeks episode that I'm actually describing in the new book I'm writing, which is a prequel to the one we're discussing. And at the end of these 7 weeks, I had proven the conjecture except for one case. That's not bad. That was already great. But there was a missing case that was requiring a different technology to solve. I think it was 18 months after solving the first all but one cases, I had another epiphany, like reading a random paper that someone had sent me, and I said, oh, maybe this is the missing thing. And then something absolutely incredible happened. And that's why I'm really talking about this order of magnitude shift. I think something's changed because of the first episode. The first episode where I worked for 7 weeks. Between 10 to 15 hours every day, every single day for 7 weeks, including Sundays.
And that was you were saying up till then you had difficulty concentrating more than like 10 hours a week.
I think I had weeks that were a bit better, but that kind of very intense focus I never maintained for so long, yeah. So you have different levels. Maybe you can write a paper and fix bugs in written things, but it's not the same thing as trying to visualize shapes in crazy spaces, It's about the shape of a very complex space in very arbitrary dimension where you remove certain hyperplanes, complex hyperplanes, and you try to understand the shape of a space. It's hard. And I did that in a sustained manner for like 7 weeks. Because I knew there was, it's like I had to find a special way to find a tessellation, a tiling of that very complex space, and I had to find the base brick for that. And I tried every shape I could imagine for 7 weeks. Completely stupid thing, but it worked, and I found the right one. And it changed me at a very deep way. And after that, I became able to kind of enter and exit that kind of trance state much more easily. I know it sounds crazy, but I really experienced it that way. It's as if I had opened a new pathway in my brain where I could, or maybe a new mood, where I could meditate on very abstract things without any fear, a very decentered way, egoless way. I had learned something. I had been, awakened to something. It sounds crazy, but I'm just trying to describe the phenomenology of what happened to me. I'm not trying to theorize it. I'm just describing. And when 18 months after that, I had this second epiphany, it was not driven by fear. There was no fear at all. I was quiet, confident, but I saw things and I looked at them and they opened gates and gates and gates. And like in 6 weeks, I was drowned by epiphanies. So I actually solved the conjecture I was working on. I solved another conjecture that my advisor had given me like 12 years before. That was a byproduct, like half a page of proof with the new machinery I had invented during the 6 weeks. It was not the central thing, but it's just half a page proving another big conjecture. I wrote 2 papers, and I knew that these 2 papers were capturing maybe 10 or 20% of all the ideas I had during the 6 weeks. I'd quit math just after that because I was kind of overwhelmed by this experience. And one paper I remained a preprint. It's not published. It's my preferred one. It's the one I find the most beautiful, but the less easy to explain. And the other one I submitted to Annals of Mathematics. And just to give a benchmark of the fact that it was actually difficult math, not just fantasy. That's because from the outside it looks like you had some kind of psychotic episode and it's just nonsense. But the thing is, you prove the theorem. And the community can check that the proof is correct. If the proof is correct, that's kind of a cryptographic proof that you access some certain cognitive mode that other people could not access. It's a fact. It's a theorem. I was in a certain mindset that allowed me to see things that nobody had seen before. So this paper ended up being accepted in the Annals of Math, but it took them 4 referees to get someone who was willing to read it entirely, and it took 7 years to get accepted. So part of that is because I'd been sloppy in my writing at places because it was too hard, too long. It's 100 pages paper, and at some point you get just tired and you become sloppy. But part of that is because it was connecting many different things that were hard to make sense of. So it was hard to find another person who could actually read it. And again, this is a tiny, tiny achievement in mathematics compared to what people like Terry Tao and many others have done. I absolutely do not claim to be in the same league. I'm very far below. But on the other end, I'm way above what I was when I started. The scientific impact and value from a mathematical perspective of this 100-page paper that's maybe 10% in itself of what I had during this epiphany is worth 100 more than my first math paper I published when I was a grad student. There's no doubt. It's impossible to compare. It's like there's as much difference as doing primary school math and calculus. It's the same gap.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. I mean, could you explain what was going through your head? You said you were in an egoless state and you kind of felt kind of the math flowing through you, right? Like, what was your experience of it in terms of how you felt? And also, you were so consumed by this that it took up, what was it, like 15 hours a day of your life consecutively for those entire 6 weeks. Is that right? So
for the first 7 weeks, it was really like working hours. For the second one, it was more crazy than that. It was, I had the feeling at some point that mathematics was thinking inside my brain against my will. It just wouldn't stop. It wouldn't stop. One night I woke up and I was thinking about this idea that connecting group cohomology with causal resolution and desingularization of theory of singularities and whatever. And I thought, okay, maybe there's this book I bought like 10 years ago and I could not understand it. But I think it's written in that book. So I woke up in the middle of the night and I went to the bookshelf where that book was. It was the second volume of Representation and Cohomology by Dave Benson, published by Cambridge University Press. And I opened the book and I flipped through the pages. And everything I had seen in my dream, I knew it was there. And it was all obvious, like for 100 pages. I just started this interview saying, I cannot read math books. And I still cannot read them. But I had seen everything in my dream, so everything was obvious. So I should just flip through a page. It was like a cartoon. It was ridiculous. It was obvious. And of course, there were many other things that were not in the book that were new research and new theorems, and that were equally obvious for me, but I just needed to write them down, and that took me months to write down after that. And there was no on-off switch in that second episode. I was really consumed by it. It was overwhelming. It's actually one of the reasons why I stopped mathematics. There are a bunch of reasons, but one is I was super happy to experience that, but I did not want to continuously raise the stakes. At some point you think, okay, what's going to be the next one? And if I don't raise the stakes, will I be happy or frustrated? Because maybe, once you had that, you want to have that again, but if you have that again, maybe you're not going to be so happy, So it's kind of, you don't really know what you're going to do. Also, another reason is I had my research program, like many things, like work for 20 or 30 years, and I had proven everything in 6 weeks. So there's nothing left in my research program. So just to add an important caveat for people who are listening, especially I'm thinking about PhD students and researchers, I had a very abnormal career. And I don't think this is the right way to do math. I think I experienced it that way because of the episode I mentioned earlier, that I had dropped out and abandoned the first PhD and started again after 2 years, after 2 very difficult years in my life, where when I re-entered mathematics, not as a regular PhD student, but as someone who has failed and someone who was trying to understand what went wrong and how to right it. Every mathematician has a metacognitive persona, but mine was extreme. I was more of a meta-mathematician than a mathematician. I was more interested in the metacognitive thing. So this is why I experimented so much. This is why I pushed myself so hard, and this is why I progressed so much. Usually people don't progress that much. And you can have a great career if you stay where you're in a PhD, but I moved to a different category. Still many people above me, way above, but I was clearly above when I started. And it was exhausting. Honestly, it was hard.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, obviously the natural question for me was, once you access this state of kind of superhuman ability, why not just off to the races and have like a happy rest of your mathematical career being able to do this? So to go back to kind of the education angle, so you write in the book that we've achieved universal literacy but created a total disaster with universal math education. And I'm wondering, is there a way do you have a specific vision of reorienting the high school math system? So I had my friend Andre read the book, and afterwards, he told me he really liked the book, but what he really wanted was kind of like a one-page algorithm, like an instruction manual. There's various threads in the book about, your ideas and Descartes' ideas and Grothendieck's ideas, but he couldn't quite reconstruct the exact Bessis algorithm from what he'd read. So another way of approaching this question of how you would restructure education is there like a one-pager that you could write that you would kind of like plaster on the wall of every high school math class?
I'd love to do that, but I know there is a danger coming with that. I have no experience in teaching in primary school and in high school. And I've seen many examples of famous, brilliant, smart mathematicians making recommendations for teaching that were completely dysfunctional when applied to a real classroom. So I don't want to overreach and say things that are going to be disastrous in real life. So I want to be very modest when I make recommendations. I have 3 different things. And I think they're small, the 3 of them. And they still you need to add details about how you're going to implement them. The first one is, I think the right expectations for what a student at whatever age should gain from a year of having an instructor teaching him or her some mathematics. And I think we focused, because school has to be structured around syllabus, we structure on learning specific concepts. And I think we should be adding one important thing is experiencing a certain emotion. And I can name this emotion that I think every instructor should try to inspire in every student at least once a year. And it should be not just provoked, but it should be named and showcased and celebrated. This emotion is the following one. Start with something that makes no sense to you, a new concept. Let's say you start, explaining what is a derivative with epsilons, or maybe just understanding what is division when you're in primary school, or understanding fractions, or understanding what is a cosinus, whatever. It could be understanding what is an equivalence of categories if you're in more advanced classes. And start with something and make sure that the student is aware that they don't understand that. Then, after weeks and months, go to a moment where the notion, the theorem, the proof that was previously completely obscure has become transparent. Make them notice that they were at this point where it made no sense, and now they're at that point where it's become obvious. We experienced that. I said that my youngest son is counting up to 4. At some point, it will become obvious to him that there's an infinity of numbers. That's a revolution. It should be celebrated as such. And if we provoke that epiphany of understanding that you can reprogram your brain so that something that was completely obscure can become completely transparent, then you've learned something fundamental about mathematics, and you learn something fundamental about your own ability to progress. And this is, to me, the most important thing. So that's the one thing. The second thing is, it should not replace the standard teaching, but maybe the first lesson and maybe 1 out of 15 lessons should be kind of metacognitive, meta-mathematical lesson. What is mathematics? How does it work? How do you do it? How do you practice? So my wife is, she knows nothing about math, and she studied theater. She's a theater director. One day I asked her this question, do you know that when people do math, they do unseen actions in the head? And I saw her eyes opening. What? Nobody told me that. Now, it's interesting because if you ask this question to people who do math, they all say, yeah, of course. How do you do math if you don't do unseen action in your head? And other people say, what? Nobody told us that. If we had been told, we would have loved math, but nobody told us. This is shocking in a way, So this kind of resetting the expectation around math, what math is supposed to be, how you're supposed to practice it. You're supposed to do things in your brain, you're supposed to trust your intuition, but not completely. So listen to it and correct it. And all these things, the metacognitive trick that are the oral tradition, have them maybe make 5% or 10% of the teaching. Just a drop. You don't need too much. You still need to stick to the formal teaching, but just a drop of that. So that's the second thing. And the third thing is has more to do with the organization of the class. I think we should encourage peer mentoring. You have a new thing, like this, split the class in half. Take the half that understands and the half that doesn't understand, and create pairs of one who understands with one who doesn't understand, and have them explain to each other for 1 hour. I know from some teachers that this is deployed with success in certain classes. Of course, this is technical issues around that. You have noise, you have how do you do that? make sure that you don't waste time, don't lose too much time compared to the syllabus, but still, I think this is a good thing to have. Again, not trying to replace the structured teaching, but being maybe 20% or 30%, or I don't know.
Those all sound like really, really promising potential ideas that kind of align with the messages from your book. That brings me to my final question. So my question is for a young person who, right now might aspire to be a mathematician, has dreams of pursuing a career in a mathematically intensive subject, but is filled with self-doubt. What would you say to that person? Imagine that it's you yourself who had just failed the first PhD program. What message would you have to that person in that position right now?
So it's a complex one. I cannot answer it in a one-dimensional way because I think there are many considerations to have, depending on whether there is a credible career path for this person or not. The first generic advice is do not underestimate yourself. It's a fact that most math students underestimate themselves and underestimate their progression margin. The notion that you have a ceiling that is hard-coded in your genetics is bullshit, I think. And it's very dangerous for you. I don't know, and this is something to be discussed case by case, what are the credible opportunities from where you are right now in the environment with the opportunities you have and the current skills that you have. But one thing is certain, you have the ability to become 1,000 times better at math. That's beyond doubt. And it's impossible to imagine that because this will only happen because your brain will gradually reconfigure, both in terms of your ability to make sense, make intuitive sense of very abstract mathematical objects that are currently way above your current intuitive ceiling. And it's impossible for you to imagine what it feels, but it's a wonderful experience. And you will also learn about your emotions, learn about the metacognitive tricks that will accelerate. That's why you will see some clear discontinuity in your trajectory. You may feel that you're not making any progress for a year, and then suddenly you become like 10 times better, like overnight. And it's worth trying. If you're interested in math, if you love math, if you're brave, then it's certainly worth exploring and working hard. And you should work hard because it's very hard and it requires work. There's no doubt.
Thank you, David. I found the ideas in your book and in our discussion incredibly provocative, incredibly interesting, and incredibly valuable. So thank you for this discussion and thank you for writing the book.
Thank you very much. It was a wonderful discussion. You let it be very personal, which I think will be, I hope, valuable for the people who listen to us. So thanks a lot.